barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's permission, we are together again to speak about this individual whom is named the Sword of Allah, Abu Sulaiman Khalid ibn Walid. And go in detail about this beloved Sahaba and just to see um, where he started and where he is now. And alhamdulillah, it's my hope that as we're talking about these things, of which we have discussed in our question and answer, how people are starting to, kind of bond with a certain Sahaba. We've learned about Al-Qaqa, we've learned about Rafa, and a lot of other Shuhabil, a lot of the Sahabas that we haven't necessarily heard of before. We always hear about Abu Bakr and Abu Huraira and Ibn Abbas and Anas bin Malik and all of these other famous Sahaba, but the men who are out there really putting in the work, spreading Islam, we're getting the opportunity to really see how they, the courage that they had, the piety that they had. And this rumor or these lies through history that was told about Khalid ibn Walid, he was some bloodthirsty warlord type of thing. We see that that is definitely not the case. When they had opportunities to make peace with people, then he definitely did that. And moves that he did that was somewhat questionable at first, we understood that he did it in order to bring people closer to Islam. So we had an opportunity to know what Sahaba, I'm sorry, what tribe he's from. He's from Bani Makhzum, and from that particular tribe were known prior to Islam. These were the branch of people who were they were good at war. They were the ones who were going to defend Mecca. And out of Bani Makhzum, Khalid was the best out of Bani Makhzum. So last week, we talked about the, I want to say it was called the Battle of the Brocade. And the reason it being that is because when the Muslims were laying siege to Damascus, there's a situation where the ruler, or who was the person who was defending that area, he went to Abu Ubaidah. Instead of going to Khalid, and once again, this goes to show. Now, I want people to understand, once again, the Romans are a different type of army than the Persians. And they have been fighting for centuries. And the people whom now the Muslims are coming up against, these are seasoned veteran fighters. They've been fighting in Turkey. They've been fighting in the Persian Empire. And they had a reputation for being extremely crafty when it came to fighting. And as we go along, we'll see even more of some of the things in which they used to do in terms of fighting in these battles. And so Abu Ubaidah, he makes a deal with this particular general, and they get to leave the area, and they get to take all of their stuff with them. So the Muslims were extremely angry at this. And actually, Abu Ubaidah did not really have the authority, for the most part, to make this type of treaty or truce with these people, because Khalid was actually the one who was in charge. And so Abu Ubaidah had given them a lot of allowances. He had told them that they could surrender. He told them that they could take everything with them. And so as Abu Ubaidah is walking in peace with the guy, Khalid is coming the other way, and they're killing people left and right because they're fighting. And so the Christian that had made the agreement said that give us 3 days of peace. And after that, then the truce is over and it's done with. And so the Muslims waited. We said last week was the theme of lovers. So we talked about Jonah the lover, and he couldn't get his woman back. And so what he did, he went to the Muslims and told them that probably where they were going, and he knew a shortcut on how to get to these people. So make a long story short, the Muslims ended up finding them. They fought them, and they were able to take a whole lot of spoils and come back. And in the meantime, we understand that Abu Bakr, he passes away. And Abu Ubaidah, he gets the letter. And then when they come back from this particular mission, then he gets the letter from Umar ibn al-Khattab, who is now the Caliph. And Khalid is staring at this letter, and he looks at the first words. And it's basically saying that relieving him of his command. And so he says, Abu Bakr, this is Khalid. He said, praise be to Allah who decreed death upon Abu Bakr, who was more beloved to me than Umar. Praise be to Allah who gave authority to Umar, who was less beloved to me than Abu Bakr, but he compelled me to love him. And this is from Khalid ibn Walid when he got the news of Abu Bakr dying. And so Umar, he writes a letter, or a poet, he records a saying of Umar ibn al-Khattab. He said, you have done deeds which no man has done, or which no one has done, but people do nothing, for Allah is the doer. So this is Umar's stance. And through this journey that we're going on about Khalid, we understood that there was always this concern that Khalid had about, that Umar had about Khalid. It was always he felt that he was getting praised too much. And we talked about as to why it wasn't out of jealousy or anything else like that. And he was also very concerned that of a person becoming corrupted and doing injustice in the battlefield. So this is something that Umar was concerned about as well. And alhamdulillah, we see that the Muslim army is an army of morality, okay? Because in any other time, in a lot of other empires, we saw with the Persian Empire, and then there was another situation with the Byzantine Empire where the generals were actually at it with each other, and they wanted to kill one another. And they was vying for power against one another. And so therefore, this is something that Omar, being as keen on things as he was, this is something he wanted to make sure that justice always prevailed, even when the Muslims were involved in fighting the enemy, okay? So in Medina, as Abu Bakr lay dying, he called for some writing materials, and he wrote an order. And after him, Omar would become the Caliph, and the believers would swear they would take bay'ah to Umar ibn al-Khattab. And this was the last order of Abu Bakr. So this is the 13th year of Hijri, on the August 22nd in the year 634. So Abu Bakr died, Umar becomes the Caliph, and on the same day, he issues this order and for Khalid to be dismissed of his command as commander-in-chief. And he appoints Abu Ubaidah as the commander-in-chief. So he writes a letter to Abu Ubaidah, in the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, I urge upon you the fear of Allah who lives eternally while everything else perishes, who has guided us away from wrongdoing and taken us out of the darkness into the light. I appoint you commander of the army of Khalid ibn Walid, so take charge as is your duty. Send not Muslims into their destruction for the sake of plunder, and place not Muslims in a camp without doing the reconnaissance and knowing what's in there. Send not expeditions except in properly organized units, and beware of taking any steps which may lead to an annihilation of the Muslims. Allah has tried me with you and tried you with me. Guard against the temptations of this world, lest they destroy you as they have destroyed the others before you, and you have seen how they felt. So this letter was given to a messenger, and it was to be given to Abu Ubaidah while they were in Syria. Okay, so the next day, Omar led the congregational salah, and he's in the Prophet's masjid. And so when the prayer was over, he addressed the people, and he says, "Lo, the Arab is like a camel which follows its master and waits for him wherever it's made to sit. And by the Lord of the Kaaba, I shall carry you on the right path." So in the rest of the sermon, he emphasized various virtues and duties that's enjoined upon the Muslims, and he pledged to do his best to further the interest of Islam. So coming to the end of his sermon, he informed the congregation that he had removed Khalid from being commander-in-chief in Syria, and he appointed Abu Ubaidah as to replace him. So they were extremely miffed about this, and they didn't take it too well. So everybody else, Omar is a is a very intimidating figure. Okay. And so a young man who couldn't contain himself, he jumps up and he said, in whose hand Allah has placed a victorious sword, with whom Allah has strengthened his religion. Allah will never forgive you, nor will the Muslims, for sheathing the sword and dismissing a commander whom Allah has appointed to command. So Umar, he knew that this particular young person was from Bani Makhzum. He's from the clan of Khalid. Okay, so he understood this was not, he wasn't the only one that felt like this. Okay, and he decided not to say anything on the subject at that particular moment. And he just makes a comment that he's looking at the young man as him being very passionate about what happened and sensitive about what happened. And he makes the comment and says, the young man is angry on account of the son of his uncle. Okay. And then he walked away from the masjid. So over the day, Umar ibn al-Khattab, he reflects on Khalid's dismissal. And he came to the conclusion that he had to give more detail, okay, or more of an explanation, that the people weren't necessarily going to go for him just saying, oh, Khalid got dismissed and that's it. That wasn't flying over well with them. So he goes and he addresses them the next day and he says, I'm not averse to Khalid being in command, but he is wasteful and he squanders his wealth on poets and warriors, giving them more than what they deserve, which wealth could be better spent in helping the poor and the needy among the Muslims. Let none say that I have dismissed a strong man and appointed a mild to command, for Allah is with him, talking about Abu Ubaidah, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will help Abu Ubaidah. So this time, nobody necessarily, they didn't say anything like they did before. So the messenger was carrying this letter to Damascus, and this is why the siege was going on, okay? So this is what we talked about. This is during the siege, the battle of the brocade, where they go and they hunt them down and they find them and stuff like that. So the person who has this letter, he knew the contents of the letter, what was in it. And him being a smart person, you don't go and deliver. Number one, Abu Bakr was like a father to everybody. He was a beloved individual, and we can see why when we dealt with our class about Abu Bakr. And he was loved. So you don't go in the midst of, number one, they're in a hard-pressed situation. They fighting sally after sally after sally. The people are attacking them. They're repelling them. So you don't come and say, oh, yeah, by the way, the spirits is down and somebody who everybody loved just died. Okay? So he told everyone that basically reinforcements was coming. They were on their way. And he arrived at the tent of Abu Ubaidah when nobody else was around, and he hands Abu Ubaidah the letter. So he read the letter, and he was shocked. And he did not want to do this to Khalid, okay? So we get how Abu Ubaidah is a beloved Sahaba, and he has a very soft heart. He's a courageous, brave person, but he has a very soft heart, and all of the Muslims love Abu Ubaidah, and Abu Ubaidah loved Khalid. And this is a dishonor for somebody like that, for something like this to come to him, and the fact that he had to be one of the people to deliver this news to the sword of Allah. He was not looking forward to this, and he also understood that Khalid was highly regarded amongst the soldiers. I mean, every battle that they've gone into with Khalid, through Allah's permission, they've been victorious under magnificent odds. Okay, and so the impact of this could change. The impact of the change of command could have a really negative impact on the army. Okay, so Abu Ubaidah, he told the person, he said, basically, keep this between us and don't say anything to anybody. Okay, so the messenger, being questioned, assured him that he had not divulged the contents of the letter to anybody. Okay, and Khalid, who signed the pact with the people in Damascus, and now Abu Ubaidah it wasn't until a few hours after Khalid returned from the Medal of the Brocade, the Al Abu Ubaidah, he ends up, he pulled Khalid aside. He told him about the death of Abu Bakr, and then he gave him Umar's letter. Okay, so as like we said before, Khalid is slowly reading this letter, and it became quite clear to him that he was being demoted, and that Abu Ubaidah now was the commander in chief, and he's heard about it, but he's not surprised either. And so he said, from the date on the letter, Khalid saw that it was more than a month old, and it had to reach Abu Ubaidah about 3 weeks ago, 3 weeks prior to him getting this. So Abu Ubaidah is been holding on to this letter for 3 weeks. So this goes to show you too, my goodness, how can somebody keep that information to themselves, that Abu Bakr had passed away? But this goes to show you the love and the concern that Abu Ubaidah had for the Ummah. Okay, so he goes and they're in the midst of this problem and this issue, and they're saying, okay, look, he's holding on. So he goes to him and he says, listen, why didn't you tell me about this? You know what I mean? And he said, may Allah have mercy on you. So this is once again something that Khalid is upset about with Abu Ubaidah, but he respects him so much in his tone, in his language. Even he's asking Allah to have mercy upon him, even when he's kind of upset with Abu Ubaidah. So he says, I wish not to weaken your authority while you was engaged with the enemy. Now, anybody with some sense knows that this is the proper thing to do. Okay? So a few moments, Khalid was kind of in his thoughts, and he was thinking about Abu Bakr. And it said Abu Ubaidah looked at him with sympathy and partly embarrassment in his eyes too. So he remarked, may Allah have mercy upon Abu Bakr. He lived, and if he had lived, I wouldn't have been removed from my command. And then it said that he slowly bowed his head, and then he walked away from the tent. And subhanAllah, Khalid, it said, now somebody being as hardcore as Khalid is, it said that night he went in his tent and he cried because Abu Bakr had passed away. So we see once again on this other side of Khalid. So October 2nd, in the 13th year of the Hijri, the army was assembled and was informed of the two changes: the Caliph being Umar ibn al-Khattab, and Abu Ubaidah being the leader of, who are now the commander-in-chief of the army. And so that day, the Muslims in Damascus took bay'ah to Umar, and if it was any resentment that Khalid had in his heart, he didn't show it, alhamdulillah. And he said, if Abu Bakr is dead, then Umar has to be obeyed. Now, this is a major, major, major thing, brothers and sisters. And I don't know if the brothers in the Caribbean is listening. You know what I mean? They have a community. They got a Jamaat down there. This is something in which has caused problems throughout history, not just other Muslim parts of history. This could have been a major turning point for the not so good, because in history, when a general is very popular amongst his people, now the Romans even had a history of murdering those types of people, because if the person became more popular than Caesar did, then that was a threat to the authority. And they can cause a problem, they can raise an army, and they can go in and they can take over. At this particular juncture, Khalid, if he didn't have the iman that he had, the faith that he had, he could have caused a major issue, because he was ransacked. And you have some people, the soldiers, they might have been looking at Khalid and some people try to get a reaction to see how you feel and how you're going to act in a situation. And alhamdulillah, Khalid, with no type of hesitation, he said, listen, Abu Bakr is dead and Umar is the Caliph, and we hear and we obey. Whatever he say, this is what's going to happen. Regardless of whatever my personal feelings are about what he did, This is what we have to do. So this gets everybody back on track in terms of what they should be doing. So there was nothing and nobody that he could really air his grievances out to, because we know that Abu Bakr pretty much let Khalid do whatever. And if he did something that was questionable, Khalid would explain himself to Abu Bakr, and Abu Bakr was like, good, you was in the right, everything was cool, keep doing what you're doing, okay? So a week after Abu Ubaidah assumed the command, a Christian Arab who was seeking the favor of the Muslims, he comes to Abu Ubaidah and he tells them about this great fair that the Romans get ready to have in a place called Abu Quds. So at this fair, visitors and merchants from all over the Asian zone come there, and it's like a fair. So they come there, they buying and they selling. And so he said, listen, if y'all want more spoils, then this is the time and the place to go ahead and do it. So an informer, he said he didn't know if there was a strong Roman army there or not. He wasn't for sure, but he did know that this fair was going on. So Abu Ubaidah, he spoke with the people, the warriors that was around him, and he asked anybody if they would want to volunteer to take command of this particular column to go and deal with at this raid in Abu Quds. So he was hoping that Khalid would offer, but Khalid didn't say nothing. He sat back, he didn't say anything, and then a youth came forward who said his beard was barely showing. He was just getting some beard. That's how young he was. And he volunteered with enthusiasm to go on this particular raid. And this was no other than, his name was Abdullah, and this was the son of Jafar ibn Abi Talib. His father was the one that was killed in the Battle of Mu'tah. Okay? And so he's going, and he is appointed with about 500 men to go and deal with this particular raid. Okay? So he marches off at nighttime, and he has Abu Dharr al-Ghafari with him, another famous Sahaba. And they're marching. So you got a person who is looking to prove himself, and then you got another person who is looking for martyrdom. And so that's kind of like, it's not really a good combination. Okay? So what happens is that they end up going, and then the following morning, it was being guarded by 5,000 Roman soldiers. This is something, they only got 500 men. So this is something that they was not expecting. So the veteran soldiers, they knew how to defend themselves quickly, and the Roman soldiers ended up attacking them, okay? And so they go, and once again, remember we talked about the Romans had this thing where they would try to charge you and formulate a circle and then enclose in on you. That was something that they were known for, and it was a very effective strategy. And so what they did, they got them in a tight ring, and the Muslims is fighting ferociously to try not to get overtaken. So one Muslim ended up escaping, and he runs back into where they are in Damascus, and he tells Abu Ubaidah of the situation that was going on. So Abu Ubaidah is sitting around the generals, and he thought about what Umar said. Umar specifically told him, don't send Muslims out to their destruction for the sake of getting money. You know what I'm saying? This is for Allah. This is to spread Islam. This is not about going and getting money. That's just part of the benefit of this, but it's not about that, okay? So they went there specifically for that, and then he thought about, this is exactly what Umar told me not to do, and then look what happened. So the first military decision that he makes, he turns around and he does this, he allows this situation to happen, okay? So then he looks, and he's looking around, and he said that nobody could deal with this except for the sword of Allah. So he turned around to Khalid, and he said, "O father of Suleiman, I ask you in the name of Allah to go and rescue Abdullah ibn Jafar. You're the only one who can do so." And then he said, "I certainly will do so, inshallah." He said, "I only waited for your command." This is another big, huge thing that Khalid did in order to, he's demonstrating, and he's showing that he was the commander, and he's also capable of taking commands, and he wasn't going to, he could have easily got up and said, Abu Ubaidah, I'm getting ready. You know what? You sitting around here. I'm getting ready to go make a move. I'm about to go, forget what you talk. He could have done that, and other people have done stuff like that before in history. Okay? But he wanted to show through example that I'm no longer the commander. This is the commander. And when he gives me an order, inshallah, I will gladly do it. Okay? So he said, Abu Ubaidah said, I felt hesitant to ask you. You know, it's kind of like he was embarrassed to ask him. Like, it's like, okay, you need my help now? I was the commander. That's how some people would have thought about that. So Khalid then tells Abu Ubaidah, he said, by Allah, if you were to appoint a young child over me, I would obey him. And how can I not obey you when you are above me in Islam and I have been named trusted, the trusted one by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and I can never attain your status. I declare here and now that I have dedicated my life in the way of Allah the Most High. And in a voice choking with emotion, Abu Ubaidah is so moved by that because he knows what could have happened. He said, may Allah have mercy on you, O father of Suleiman. Go and save your brothers. So within a half an hour, the mobile guard, remember we talked about, this is a guard that Khalid formulated. It's about 4,000 cavalry. And these are like the best of the best now. So every time it's a situation, the mobile guard comes running in. So he goes and they go in the direction of Abdul Qus, and Dirar is with him too. The naked champion is what they will call him. So of course, Khalid, he goes in there, he saves the trapped Muslims, but mashallah, the Romans had killed a lot of the Muslims that was with them. So he also raided the market in Abdul Quds, and he brought back a whole lot of spoils, and he gave it to some of the soldiers, and of course, 1/5 of it was to go back to Medina. Okay, so the result in the action of Abdul Qus, it left no doubt that there was any about Khalid's reaction to his dismissal, like I said. So Abu Ubaidah, he writes Omar on what would happen and giving generous praises to Khalid and for the part that he had played. All right. So the dual change in personalities, the Caliph in Medina and the commander-in-chief in Syria, was to have an effect on the conduct and pace of the military operations. So Umar's method was different from Abu Bakr's. So Abu Bakr would give commanders their missions, an area of operations, and leave them to conduct their own campaigns. So Umar would be specific in objectives for each individual battle. So later in his caliphate, he would even lay down details on who he wanted to be in the right wing, the left wing, in the center. He even got that involved. Abu Bakr was never did anything like that. So Umar confirmed various corps commanders of their roles allotted to them by Abu Bakr. Amr bin Aus would be in command of Palestine or Philistine, Yazid in Damascus, Shaharbil in Jordan, Abu Ubaidah in Misa after it was taken. So the roles included not only the military command of various corps, but the political control of the provinces too. And we'll see there's been a couple times where the Muslims have went and taken a land over, and then they end up losing it and had to come back and fight for it. Okay, which makes sense. They can't. So it's not like they got 1 million people out there fighting with them. When they can leave 100,000 people in this city, another 100,000 people in this city, they are an army on the move. And when they conquer a place, it's a small. Once they make a agreement with the people, they leave behind a small little detachment to make sure that things are running in order. Okay, so Sharabil was the commander of operations in Jordan, but he was the governor of the district of Jordan. And Abu Ubaidah remained the commander-in-chief as the army as a whole, although he would command the army only when the corps fought all together. All right. So Sharabil and the rest of them, wherever they were, they would do what they saw fit as far as fighting. So Khalid was there, but he had no role, mashallah. So by the order of Omar, he would operate under Abu Ubaidah and later confirmed him as commander of the corps in Iraq, included the mobile guard. So in military status, Khalid was equal to other corps commanders, but politically he was nobody. So he didn't allow him to be in charge and be a governor of these particular districts. But I mean, you cannot ignore the fact that you need Khalid in these particular situations, okay? So the slowdown was inevitable. So Abu Ubaidah, being a skilled and fearless fighter himself, so over the next few years, he actually ended up becoming a good general because he was kind of green. So we see that even some of the things that he did definitely screamed something as somebody who wasn't as knowledgeable about the battlefield like Khalid ibn Walid was. Okay, so he would rely heavily on the advice from Khalid, and Khalid, he sat beside him as much as he possibly could. So even when he told him, when he got the letter, and Khalid had swore to everybody that he would follow Abu Ubaidah's leadership, so on and so forth, Abu Ubaidah even tells him that any major decision that I make, I will always come to you and ask for your advice, alhamdulillah. He would hold councils of war and write to Medina and seek the caliph's decision regarding the next objective. So Khalid would rush into a situation for battle, from going one place to one place, and he would run in and surprise people. Abu Ubaidah moved slow and steady. Okay, and he actually, alhamdulillah, he would win battles like this. So within the new arrangement, with the mutual respect and affection that Abu Ubaidah and Khalid had with each other, alhamdulillah, so it was a beautiful thing. Okay, so their conquering of Syria continued. So now we got that out the way. The Caliph, Abu Bakr, has passed away. Umar is the Caliph. Any type of fitna that could have been started is all crushed now. Khalid, Abu Ubaidah, they love each other, they respect each other. Khalid is showing through his example that Abu Ubaidah is to be followed, and boom, let's go on with our mission. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, the plotting of evil surrounds only its own plotters. So Heraclius, who is Caesar, was a man who did not give up easily. And remember, we talked about, these are not people who are not experienced at war. Heraclius have fought plenty of times in terms of strategizing against enemies. And this is why the Byzantine or the Roman Empire became as big. They didn't become big like that because they were stupid and made a lot of mistakes. So his next move after the situation that happened to Abu Quds was to put another army in the field consisting of people fresh from northern Syria, the Jazeera, and from Europe, actually. So the army included survivors from the Meadow of the Brocade, and part of the army gathered at Antioch, while another part by the sea and the Mediterranean ports of Syria and Philistine. So the Muslims received intelligence of the Romans moving towards a particular area. So before the concentration of Romans at a place called Baisan was complete, they knew that that the strength of the army would be about 80,000 men on the side of the Roman army. Okay, and the person, his name, the commander, he was called Sakalar, and he was the son of a person named Mehrak. So it was evident that the force would move eastward and place itself astride the Muslim lines of communication. Okay, so a council was held by Abu Ubaidah, and it was decided that they should move and try to go and crush the army and leave a strong garrison to hold Damascus. All right, so this is a thing too. So the Muslims always, because they were outnumbered, remember the Romans, the Persians, they always tried to take, because the empire was so big. So somebody was coming from this area, somebody was coming from this area, and the Muslim thing was find out who's coming from where so they could try to cut them off and fight that particular group instead of fighting the big, larger group at hand. So in the middle of January, the Muslims arrived at a place called Fahal to find a Roman garrison had left. And they left a brother, his name was Abul Awar, He was in occupation of the town. And it looked like a marsh stretching on both sides of the Jordan River. Okay? So carrying out the Caliph's instruction to the letter, he probably didn't mean it as much as Abu Ubaidah took it, that precise in terms of forthcoming missions. But the second week of January, this is around the year 635, the Muslim army, leaving behind the corps of Yazid, marched from Damascus under the command of Shahrabil, with Khalid in with the corps of Iraq, forming an advance guard. Okay. So as soon as the Roman garrison of Fahal heard of the advance of the Muslims coming from Damascus, it left the place in haste and it ran towards where the bigger part of the army was going to be in Basan. So immediately after the Romans, wishing not to disturb at Basan before their preparations were complete, they dammed the river. So they blocked it, and it was a few miles south of Basan and the Fahal line. And they flooded a low-lying belt was stretched on both sides of the bank. Now, this is genius of what they did. So the flooded area determined by the contour line and places was a mile from the river. And so some of the routes across the inundated the area, but was only known to the Romans. So the Muslims is in foreign land. The Romans know this stuff good, so they know exactly what they're doing. So the Muslims knew the desert, and these hills, these belts of water, all of these things is totally unfamiliar to them. So they tried to attempt to cross across with this the water going off the banks, and it flooded the area. And what happens when you have water and you have earth? You produce mud. So Shahrabil deployed the army at the foot of the slope, and Abu Ubaidah and Amr bin Aus commanded the wings. So Dirar was appointed commander of the Muslim cavalry, while Khalid was with his corps and was placed in front lead and advanced to Basan. In the formation, the Muslims had advanced. So they hadn't gone too far when the advance guard got stuck in the mud. It had considerable difficulty getting out of it. So they cursed the Romans for the stratagem that they just put on them, and then they had to return. So they couldn't attack them. They had to go, and so this worked out perfectly for the Romans. Their thing was to because remember, the Muslims for the most part always took people by surprise. So what he did by damming the water, having the water go on each side, it's muddy, and now the Muslims is getting stuck and they can't go any further. So they turn around and they go back to Fahal. So a whole week had passed. That's not good because the Romans got a whole week to prepare in terms of fighting the Muslims. And they can go and try to have more people congregate with them. But so now this person, Sakalar, who was the Roman commander, he decided that the time had come to strike the Muslims. So his preparations were complete, and he hoped that he was going to catch the Muslims off guard. And so they knew how to maneuver around this stuff dealing with this marsh. And around this is in the 13th year of the Hijri, the Roman army formed up the West River and began its advance towards Fahal. And it intended to surprise the Muslims at their camps at night. So they going in there at nighttime. But the Muslims was not relaxed, all right? They wasn't like, alhamdulillah, some of these soldiers in these other armies, they would get drunk, they would have women, they would do all kind of stuff because they assumed that people were not going to attack them. But alhamdulillah, because the Muslim army was moral, they didn't drink, they didn't have women in the camp, and they were on guard, basically, okay? So Shahrabil had deployed some Muslims to basically spy on the battle positions of the Romans. So he had placed a screen of scouts along that marsh, and the Romans, when they had neared Fahal, coming towards the Muslims was already in battle array positions, immediately ready for contact against the Romans. So the two armies, they said they fought all night and the whole the next day, and the Muslim army remained on a defensive, and they beat any attempts for the Romans to be able to break through their camp. So in this meantime, Sakalar was killed. This is the Roman general that had came up with the idea of flooding the river, and the Romans decided that they had enough. So they suffered heavily at the hands of the Muslims, and they didn't breach a single place that they thought they would be able to do. So under the cover of darkness, the Romans disengaged and began to withdraw across the marsh towards Basan. So at this particular moment, this is what Shahrabil had been waiting for. So he had fought the Romans until they was exhausted. They were suffering from an adverse psychological impact that they keeps repeating them because they keep having these battles where the Muslims keep repulsing them and they're not able to get in where they needed to get in. So then they started to withdraw. So by now was the time for Shahrabil to launch a counter attack. So Shahrabil ordered in advance in the darkness, a desert, and the Arabs, they leapt and came dashing towards the Romans coming from the back. So the Roman traffic control, they thought how the way that they took, they panicked, and what did they start doing? They started running into the mud, and they got stuck, and the Muslims took advantage of it. And mashallah, this battle becomes known as the Battle of the Mud, and it's estimated and that the Muslims had killed about 10,000 of the Roman soldiers in the Battle of Fahal alone, and they were fleeing for their lives in all kind of areas. Okay, so with the defeat of the Roman army, the Muslim army also had broken up. So Abu Ubaidah and Khalid remained at Fahal, and they set out for Damascus and northern Syria. So Shahrabil with Amr bin Aus under command crossed the marsh at the river. Routes to have been found and laid siege to Basan. Okay, so after a few days, the Romans in the fort, they came out and they tried to fight Shahrabil, and soon after that particular a rush that they tried to do, they surrendered and they agreed to pay the jizya, alhamdulillah, and a certain tax to the Muslims. So this action was over, and it ended around February of 635. So there was no opposition now, and there was no opposition left in this district part of Jordan. Okay, so with the beginning in the 14th year of the Hijri, Amr bin Aus and Shahrabil, then they turned their attention toward Philistine. And Philistine was a province of Amr, and it took them a long time to deal with this. Okay, one of the advantages is that the Romans could provide fresh troops from the sea. All right, and so it was difficult. You understand what I mean? For the Muslims to be able to go into Philistine like that. So while still in Jordan, Amr had written to the Caliph and given him the latest intelligence about the Roman disposition in Philistine. And the strongest Roman force was Ajnadain. Now, we had dealt with Ajnadain before, and Umar had gave a detailed instructions to Amr about his objectives, which he was to take, and he wrote to Yazid to capture the Mediterranean coast. And so in pursuance of these instructions, the Muslim army, excluding the corps of Abu Ubaidah and Khalid, operated against the Romans in Philistine and on the coast as far as Beirut. All right, so they all up in there. So the corps of Shahrabil and Amr, they was in the second battle for Ajnadain because they had fought them before. All right, and that's the Muslims got a lot of spoils, but now this is the second battle in which that they fighting in this particular area. So Amr went to capture Nablus, Amawas, Gaza, Yubna, and occupying all of Philistine, while Shahrabil thrust against the coastal towns of Acre and Tyre. And this and Yazid with his brother Muawiyah, they went into areas of Sidon, Arqa, Jabal, and Beirut. Okay, so the place which took the longest to capture was a place called Caesarea, and Omar had given this objective to Yazid, and he and Muawiyah laid siege to that particular place but Caesarea was reinforced and supplied by the Romans by the sea and could not be captured in spite of their best efforts. So they didn't end up taking that particular area until like the 640 and the 19th year of the Hijri. Okay, so by the end of the 14th year of the Hijri, Philistine, Jordan, southern Syria, with the exception of Jerusalem and Caesarea, were in the hands of the Muslims. Okay, what time we got? Okay, alhamdulillah. So the conquest of Emesa, it said that the companions said takbir. They yelled, Allah is the greatest. And one day during the siege of Emesa, which is Homs, by which the town shook, said such that some of its walls had split asunder. And then they said another takbir upon some of the houses had collapsed. Hence the public went to their leaders and said, do you not see what has befallen us and the situation that we're in? And will you not make peace with them for us? So they made peace with them upon terms similar to that in Damascus. So in early March of 635, Abu Ubaidah and Khalid, they set from Fahal and they carried the war north. So they waited at Fahal while Shahrabil was dealing with Baisan and Tabaria. So in case a large-scale battle would develop, necessitating their participation, once in Tabaria, and was taken, the possibility of another battle in Jordan vanished and was free to depart. Okay, so a few miles west in the southwest of Damascus is stretched a grassy plain known in Muslim history as the Meadow of Rome. So towards this plain, Abu Ubaidah and Khalid moved with the intention of bypassing Damascus and continuing and advancing to Emesa. Yazid was still in a peaceful occupation of Damascus and would remain there for a few months before receiving orders from Umar to operate against the Mediterranean coast. So this Meadow of Rome, Abu Ubaidah again made contact with sizable Roman forces. Okay, so on hearing the Muslims' operation at Baisan and Tabaria, Heraclius figured that the Muslims had chosen Jordan and Philistine as their next strategic objectives and were not interested in northern Syria. Okay, so he also heard only that a weak core had remained in Damascus. So his intention was to try to go and take Damascus back because there's not a lot of soldiers there like it was before. So with the new view, this person by the name of Theodorus, he was to fight the Muslim garrison and go to Damascus and do so. So this force was set off from Antioch, moving via through Beirut and approached Damascus from the west. And this movement had hardly began when Heraclius was informed that Abu Ubaidah and Khalid had left Fahal and were moving north again. So they keeping them guessing. So they would arrive at Damascus around the same time as Theodorus. So the Romans didn't have a chance to retake that city. So to strengthen the Roman force, Heraclius ordered a detachment on the part of a large garrison in Emesa to reinforce Theodorus. And this detachment under the command of Shans, a person by the name of Shans, marched from Emesa on the direct route to Damascus. All right. So the Muslims arrived at the Meadow of Rome to find Theodorus awaiting. He was ready for him. So on the same day, Shans also arrived at Emesa, and the two armies deployed in a battle formation facing each other. Abu Ubaidah stood against Shans, and Khalid was standing against Theodorus. All right. So the strength of the Roman army is not known, but we can surmise that it was great many soldiers on both sides. Okay. So as the night fell, Theodorus decided to carry out a skillful strategic maneuver. So leaving Shans to face the Muslims, he pulled back his corps under the cover of the darkness, and he moved around the flank of Khalid. And so by the dawn the next day, he arrived in Damascus. So his intention was to keep the main body of the Muslims and at the Meadow of Rome and dealing with the corps of Shans, while his own troops will quickly destroy the Muslim garrison at Damascus. Very smart move. So it was so the movement was carried out with such perfect organization that it wasn't until later in the part of the night that the Muslims came to start thinking like, man, it's not as many soldiers as it was here. And so Khalid, being as astute as he is, he like, wait a minute, something is off. So at Damascus, Yazid has scouts, and he brought word that the Romans was coming. And Yazid immediately deployed a small corps outside the fort facing southwest, feeling more at home in the open than being in the fort. Okay, so Theodorus and Yazid end up fighting each other, and the Romans vastly outnumbered the Muslims. But when they held their own till about mid-morning, so the situation had become desperate for Yazid, and the Romans were struck in the rear by a furious Muslim horseman. So all of a sudden, Yazid didn't send for anybody. They caught Yazid by surprise. So they didn't send for anybody. All of a sudden, he sees a bunch of Muslims come running from the back, and he's like shot, and it's the mobile guard. So we know if it's the mobile guard, who's with the mobile guard, who's leading the mobile guard, it's Khalid ibn Walid, okay? So in a short time, Khalid and the veterans that was with him attacked from the rear, and he chopped the Romans into pieces when they end up coming through. So a few Romans had escaped that particular slaughter, and Khalid had killed Theodorus, and because they had a duel with each other. So a large amount of spoils, weapons, armor, had fell into the hands of the Muslims and was shared by the warriors. And like I said, in that situation, another 1/5 had went back to Medina. All right. So later the preceding night, it was discovered that half the Roman army. So now we're going back a little bit. Or how did Khalid know? And how did the Muslims end up getting there at this particular battle just in enough time when Yazid was being pressed real hard? So when the army had left that area, Khalid had correctly guessed that it was going to Damascus to go to Yazid. Somebody else may have not knew where they were going, but Khalid said, no, wait a minute. They probably going and trying to go fight Yazid. It's a small force there. They're going to try to take Damascus back and kill our men there. So Abu Ubaidah attacked the Romans on the Medal of we call it the Medal of Rome, and Abu Ubaidah, he killed Shams in a duel, and there was dead bodies everywhere. Okay, and the bulk of the army, Roman army, had got away and withdrew to Emesa. So some time was spent at the Medal of Rome in Damascus, dealing with captives and spoils of war and making arrangements for the wounded Muslims. So once the matters have been attended to, Abu Ubaidah, he sent Khalid with a corps on a direct route to Emesa, while he himself advanced to a place called Baalbek. And the garrison of Baalbek surrendered peacefully, and Abu Ubaidah then proceeded to Emesa to join Khalid, who had laid siege to that particular fort. So within a few days, the siege was going on, and a truce was agreed upon. So Emesa would pay 10,000 dinars, deliver 100 robes of a brocade, and in return, the Muslims would not attack Emesa for a year. So if, however, any Roman reinforcements had arrived to strengthen Emesa, then the truce is off and it's invalid. Okay, so the gates of Emesa was open. The Muslims came in there, and the inhabitants were like, subhanAllah, they were like, wow, the Muslims, the things that they was taking, they paid for it. Now, you know, in any other place in history, that would not have happened. So they just got finished fighting them, a truce. The Muslims came in, the city was open, everybody was safe. And when Muslims, they saw something they wanted, they paid for it. And they were like extremely surprised by this. So then there was the people, it's called Kinnasarim. And they heard the peaceful way in which the citizens of Emesa were treated and how they avoided battle with the Muslims. And they decided to make a truce with the Muslims as well. Okay. And so their thing was, it was not as dishonorable to surrender, you know, instead of getting killed. All right. So an envoy was sent to Emesa by the governor of that particular place, who made a similar truce with Abu Ubaidah for a year. Okay. So we're not going. Now remember, the caveat is but if any Roman forces come to strengthen you, then it's invalid. We know that it's some funny, some fishy stuff about that, and the truce is invalid. Okay, so we're gonna end up fighting again. So both governors of Amisa and Kennesarin made a truce for the reasons of they had some other stuff in their head. So both hoped that the garrisons would, before be there. That was Heraclius sent. So they made a truce with the intention of breaking it. Okay, so they were just basically buying time. Okay, so the common man in the region was completely won over. So remember, you got politicians, you got soldiers, and then you got regular citizens. The regular citizens loved the Muslims because the people who were politicians and soldiers were oppressive to those people. So they saw that the just and the fairness and the beautiful character of the Muslims. And so they themselves, they loved the Muslims, and they did not want to do anything that was going to jeopardize the agreement that they had with the Muslims. Okay, so these particular Emisa and Kanasarin, they solved temporarily the problem of not getting slaughtered by the Muslims. Abu Ubaidah, he dispatched a bulk of his army to a raid in northern Syria. So the Muslim columns traveled as far north as Apollo, and leaving a district of this particular place, Serene, they left it untouched. They didn't do nothing to it. They raided any locality through which they passed, and they brought in captives and spoils in the Muslim camp near Amisa. So thousands of these captives begged for their freedom, and they all agreed to pay the jizya, and they pledged loyalty to the Muslims. And alhamdulillah, the Muslims freed them. All right. So with their families, they freed them with their families, and they let them have all of their stuff. And they allowed them to return home with a guarantee of safety from the Muslims for raiding their columns. Okay, so mashallah. So this went on for months, and most of the summer was spent in this manner. Meanwhile, Umar was getting impatient in Medina. So the campaign was progressing satisfactorily in Philistine, but in northern Syria, Abu Ubaidah's sector, there seemed to be like a delay. Basically, he like, why ain't, I want you to get this particular place. Why is it taking so long? Okay, what are you doing? So around autumn time of 635, Umar wrote a letter to Abu Ubaidah in which he hinted that the general should get on with the conquest of Syria. All right. So on the receipt of this letter, Abu Ubaidah held a council of war at which it was agreed that the Muslim army should proceed north and conquer more territory. Amisa and Kennesarin could not be touched as they was under terms. So for the most part, Muslims didn't have to worry about this because they thought they was going to keep their word, right? So about early November of 635, the Muslim army marched from Amisa to a place called Hama. And the citizens came out of the city and they welcomed the Muslims actually. And the city surrendered willingly, and the army marched on. And other places they had gone, the people had surrendered peacefully to the Muslims and agreed to pay the jizya as well. Okay, so in some places the Muslims were received by musicians playing instruments, and this was a sign of welcome. So in these areas, it's also the first time that people started in large scale started converting to Islam. So they're going into these areas, and these people are converting to Islam. And alhamdulillah, Abu Ubaidah had a major part, with Allah's permission, he had a major part in giving these people dawah, and they accepted Islam. And alhamdulillah, we'll stop there. And then inshallah, we'll open up for any questions or comments, inshallah. Bismillah.
Okay, I think I got it working. Okay, we got a few questions here. Wait a minute, let me move this closer. Okay, one of the brothers says, mashallah, he said, now I understand why Umar dismissed him. It wasn't out of jealousy or cruelty, as people say, but it's what we learn here, that all power and all might belongs to Allah. And Umar did not want the people to think that power and might was Khalid. He said, thank you for helping me to see the light of this. Ameen. Okay, and then wait a minute, hold on, let me fix this so I can see him. Wait a minute, hold on, guys. Let me move this out the way. Okay, I can see here. Okay, this person, this is one of our Christian listeners, and he's being polite. Thank you for being polite. He said, so how do we understand that here we are dealing with a world war, and you just enter into a city and the people just say, hey, we're happy you're here to take us over, and they just accept that? How do we understand that?
Well, you all throughout history, this is not something that was is unique, to a situation like that. You had a lot of people, even the Christians were in the East, that when the Crusaders from the West came there, they didn't want them there, so they understood that, like, as far as they did things differently. So all throughout history, in every world war, a lot of times you have a section of society that is unhappy with the government, and like I said, the Roman Empire was tyrannical, and you had people, and even we had talked about before. I don't know if the individual who asked the question, several classes ago that we had, the Persians and the Romans, for the most part, they looked at, especially the Persians, they looked at the Arabs like a piece of garbage. They were beneath them. It was like kind of like a racist type thing. And because of the fact they were so mighty and powerful, like many other people, they're in an oppressive society, and they don't have the means or the courage to fight back and to do anything. And the Roman Empire was extremely brutal in terms of, anybody who went against them, any type of uprising, they would kill your whole family. They would kill you. So, you always had sections. Plus, if you're looking at a situation where you outnumber people, a lot of times they don't want to die. They don't want to die. So if it's like one of those things where, hey, we heard that they got a good reputation, and word travels, right? So it's kind of like a thing of, they didn't slaughter these people. They didn't slaughter these people when they went in there. They allowed them to still practice. And there's another thing too. The Muslims allowed them to still practice their religion. So it wasn't a thing where in Islam, we cannot force somebody to become a Muslim. That's a verse in the Quran. There's no compulsion in religion, right? And so therefore, Islam allowed, when they went into these areas, number one, they treated people with respect. Number two, they allowed them to practice their religion. And so when you start making the comparisons, compared to what you've always dealt with for decades and what your forefathers dealt with decades, and then these new people come in and they have a reputation of being just and being fair and being kind, and you hate the other people, it's very easy for those citizens. Not everybody. Of course, you had the army and the people in power that didn't want the Muslims there. But all throughout history, people have always had a truce. They saw that, they looked at the situation and said, you know what? This could end in our death. We outnumbered. We can't beat them. We're running out of supplies. We got to give up. And that whole kind of thing. You know what I'm saying? So this is how that became to be. This is not unique towards Islam. This kind of thing, these examples have been done in other times in history as well. So I hope that answered the question.
Okay, this is from another one of the Christians. And again, I want to thank you too for being polite. I had to ban a couple of them, but these two are nice. This man says, hello, my name is Anthony. He said, and I am a historian. He said, and this makes perfect sense, as you are saying. He said, because when you look at the history of the Anglo-Saxons and the Vikings, they conquered and were brutal. They were brutal. He said, and even I, as a Christian historian, cannot deny the history that when the Muslims conquered, they, as you said, allowed freedom of practice. I guess he meant religious practice. Freedom of religious practice. Also, the rights that your religion brought to women were non-existent during the medieval period of the Anglo-Saxons and Vikings and Danish. He said, very well done, accolades.
Thank you so much, Anthony. That means a lot coming from a historian. You know, that means a lot. Thank you so much.
Okay, now Muslim comments. And by the way, you Christians are welcome. Just keep on behaving like you are. Okay. This is from Ibrahim, one of the brothers here, the little kids here. He said, mashallah, he said, I am starting to love Abu Ubaidah.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, me too.
Okay, and this is from, I'm on YouTube now. Okay, this is from, now I can put YouTube so I can share and read it better because of this YouTube and I'm streaming there. Okay, that's Isra. Isra said, mashallah, always educational. And it is so important for us to learn about our history. Jazakallah khairan.
Barakallah feek, alhamdulillah.
Okay, this is from Brother Amir, one of my new shahadas. He said, so even though Khalid bin Walid was dismissed, he still participated in the army and fought.
100%.
He said, this is something else. This shows what we're learning. Humility is showing that those companions had humility. He said, I'm learning so much about being a Muslim.
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. And you know, and if Anthony is still listening, he could definitely concur as far as that, the situation that I gave when Khalid got dismissed, and that when Khalid was dismissed in other armies, that would have been a major issue. That would have been a major issue. Khalid could have did a rebellion. He could have been out there on his own, you know. I mean, and think about it. If you got 30, at one time they had 20,000, 18,000 soldiers rolling with him, and pretty much anything he said, they would roll with it. They went through the desert of death, following him, you know, because they loved him so much and they saw what he did. But he showed exactly what you said, his humility. And see, it's one thing to say something. You know, brothers and sisters, it's one thing to say something, it's another thing to act upon it. You know what I'm saying? So he showed, even to the point where when they wanted to go and with the fair and the Muslims had gotten into trouble and they were outnumbered, he probably was itching inside. Like he wanted to jump up and he wanted to jump on his horse and ride out. But he said, no. I didn't say anything because I wanted you to give the command. And if you give me the command, and then once, what does he do? He talks about the status to remind the men, because Shaitan, the devil, is an avowed enemy. So he listens and he watches us from when we don't see him. And so any type of something, you know, we've seen this before. And you know, you should be the guy. How would he do this to you? Why would he say, you know, you all of this stuff you've done? And if somebody who didn't have any iman and was weak and listened to that, it could have caused a major problem in the army. But alhamdulillah, Khalid, he got himself together, even though we know he's a human being. We know he was hurt. We know he was hurt when he got put down from commander-in-chief. And alhamdulillah, his whole thing is like he wasn't doing this stuff. He was just good. Allah blessed him. He was just good at what he did. You know what I mean? And just to do that and to show and to tell everybody, I'm rolling with Abu Ubaidah. what he say is what he say, and to sit there and say, "You command, what you want me to do?" Oh, okay, I was waiting for you to. I was waiting for you to tell me what to do, and that any type of anybody trying to cause problems, that knocked it out right then and there. And that's what I'm saying. Any brothers and sisters too, but more so brothers who are in communities, and you have an imam and stuff like that, that we cannot allow small little things to come and disunite us. We have to come back and we have to think about these things. Don't run every single time somebody says something to you don't like. Okay? We can't do that. We have to maintain our masjids, and we have to be able to practice our religion in this beautiful manner with these beautiful etiquettes and manners that we have, that Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam have told us that we should do. So that's what I'm saying. It's important for us to really, if these stories are beautiful, but let's take away from the story what they're teaching us. Let's take away from that and let's apply that, inshallah, because we're going to come and we're going to get tested. And the thing is that we have to be able to make the right decisions as it relates to these types of things, because these kind of things could disunite us and cause a lot of problems, which they have in the past. You see what I'm saying? So, yeah. So, alhamdulillah, that's an excellent take on how you looking at it. Is an excellent take.
Okay, two things. First, for me, exactly as Mukhtar said, this is maqasid. That's our word, maqasid. You look at the objective. Okay, look at the purpose, the meaning of what's going on in these stories of the companions, their examples, and then the goal of applying it to yourself, applying it in your communities. And this is a comment here from Anthony. He said, without a question, he said, dismissal did not occur. The Saxons, the Romans, the Anglos, the Danes, the Vikings, they would have just executed him. They would have made up a phony charge that didn't exist and would have killed him. He would not have been dismissed. Okay, and those are all the comments I have here. Good job. Good job. And thank you, Anthony, for sharing. Yes, I had to ban your friend. Yeah, I'm sorry. Thank you. But thank you for being polite. Okay, that's all I have from here. What about Zoom? Go ahead, Zoom. Oh, he apologizes for the distastefulness of his friend.
Well, that's okay.
Okay, Zoom, you guys can go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
I just really like how, in the beginning, it was Umar who he went against what the people liked and brought down, was it Khalid bin Walid from being the general? Even though the people didn't like it, he had the strength to do it for Allah. I think that's a really good reminder. It's something we all need. It's something I know personally I need, because it's scary to go against the group.
Right.
For what you believe.
Alhamdulillah. And you know what? As we get into this journey a little bit more, we'll see that. Well, I'll talk more. We really in this journey, we really love God. We really love, and you feel it's like, wow, man, he got. But we will see that Umar ibn al-Khattab he's 3 steps ahead of everybody else. You know what I mean? And we'll see, and I'll name, inshallah, why I think that was a very, very smart move as to what he did. You know what I mean? And inshallah, but you're absolutely right. Once again, he took a position, and sometimes, and he said what he said and he walked away. But, sometimes we have to, when we're dealing with people and their emotions, because we want to try to stop the devil at every chance that we get. And so when he went back, he said, listen, I think I'm going to have to explain this a little bit more. You know, and alhamdulillah, he did whatever somebody was thinking. And then we're going to get further, and then he's going to go in even more detail later on down in our story. He's going to go in even more detail about the situation with Khalid, and we'll see this beautiful situation between Khalid and Umar al-Khattab, inshallah, later on in the journey. Any other questions? Comments?
Okay, I think that's all from here.
Okay, alhamdulillah. Okay, well, inshallah, once again, if anybody got any good from this, it's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If any mistakes that was made, it's from me, and I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive me for them. Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdik wa ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta wa astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Mashallah.